Good morning. I just want to let everyone know that's online. This is the Water Quality Fee Stakeholder Meeting, and we will be going ahead and getting started here in just a couple minutes. Thank you. Good morning and welcome. This is the State Water Resources Control Board's Water Quality Fee Stakeholder Meeting. Today is Tuesday, June 9th. My name is David Ceccarelli. I'm one of the branch managers here at the Water Board in fees. Today joining me for this meeting, I have Glenn Osterhage, also with the fee branch, and John Russell, the Deputy Director of the Division of Administrative Services. Again, I'd like to thank everyone. Today's meeting is webcast. And it's a teleconference meeting only. For those that are participating and would like to, call in on the agenda that you see currently on the screen, you'll see that there's a teleconference number. That number is 1-888-273-3658, and there's a participant code of 300828. I do want to mention right now that we do have everyone on mute right now. At the end of the meeting, when we go through the presentations, we'll have an opportunity to open it up on the phone calls and we'll unmute everyone. At that point, we'll let everyone know and we'll have an opportunity to have some dialogue on the meeting. Throughout the meeting, if you'd like to ask questions, through an email, please click on the link on the agenda under the fee branch email, and we will go ahead and we'll be responding to those questions. We did receive a few questions in advance, and we'll definitely be going over those as we can. At this point, I'm going to pass it on to John Russell, and John Russell is going to give some introductory remarks. Thank you.
All right, thank you, David. Our apologies for sort of the clunky formatting of this meeting. We're going to try a little bit better in the future to maybe have a Zoom meeting, have it a little more interactive. But we're not quite there with our Zoom proficiency yet. So we will practice with that, or hopefully we will all be able to meet in person the next time we meet in August. The takeaway message for today's meeting that I want you all to take to heart is the staff recommendation this year is to not raise any water quality fees, so that it will be our staff recommendation to the board. We'll probably touch on that a couple more times as we go through the meeting, just so that's clear to everybody. The other thing I wanted to note is that usually this time of the year in May, the budget is settled down. We know more or less what's in the budget. We can tell you with some certainty what our revenues and what our expenditures are. But this is not a normal year, as you've all noticed. So the governor had the January budget. He withdrew the administration withdrew a bunch of proposals out of that budget for the May budget revision. The Assembly and the Senate did not necessarily agree with those recommendations, so they wanted some of those back in the budget. So we honestly don't know where we're going to end up with the budget in terms of what budget change proposals will be in or out this year. It's our understanding that the administration and the legislature are now discussing the budget, trying to come to a collaborative agreement on what will be in the final budget. We're winding down pretty rapidly on their time frame for doing that. I think they have to do it within the next week. So we should be seeing some things shortly. So all of that uncertainty really pushes off a little bit of the decisions that we need to make in some respects to the August meeting. Typically, the August meeting for us is more or less a pro forma meeting where we just tell you what's in the budget and what we've already told you based on the projections in May. But this year it'll be a little more important, that stakeholder meeting, in terms of actually nailing everything down. So again, just before I hand it off to Glenn, the takeaway message for you all this year is that staff are not recommending any fee changes or increases to this year's water quality fees. Glenn?
Thank you, John. For those who don't know me, my name is Glenn Osterhage, Manager in Division of Administrative Services Fee Branch. I'll be going over the cost drivers. David and I will both be talking about a couple of the BCPs or spring finance letters that are changing from the January to the May. A couple things I want to point out, as John indicated, at the top of our form here, if we get the attachment up on the screen here. Thank you, Sarah. So the first footnote at the top, basically, as John says, we're not proposing any changes at this time when we go to the board. This chart was put together, I call it in a little window, specifically looking at what's in the May revise versus our revenue projections. It does not take into consideration any expenditure mitigations, salary savings, vacancies, reduced travel, stuff like that. It doesn't look at what we have as far as our fund reserve, what our balance is going to be. Obviously, we have a higher fund reserve. It helps us have decisions with our board members on delaying some fee increases. So this is just a snapshot within the May budget and our revenue forecast. Also on here, Sarah, is this the modified one? Yeah. So we're going to switch to a slide that has added information that we'll be putting onto our website this afternoon. At our meeting in March, we had made a commitment to show more information specifically related to pro rata. It's the column D, the staff costs. So the change that's on here, no data has changed in the table. All the numbers are the same. It's just the information at the very bottom of the cost driver attachment, where we take column D, the $7.1 million increase in costs, and show you the major drivers of those changes. So historically, we've been doing the BCP changes, which is column C, and now we're adding in the major drivers for column D as well. So we had mentioned back in March, there was a change in pro rata, where last year it was not included when we set our fees. It was picked up by another funding source. So we're showing the prior year that's being added back in, the 4.9 million. And then what's new for pro rata coming into this budget, $1.7 million. So of the 7.1 million in our staff cost program adjustments, all but 500,000 of that is related to pro rata, which is our costs for the other state agencies that support our workload. So that's just showing the additional information. When we have questions and answers, we'll take that at that time. But we will be posting this updated chart on our website this afternoon or by tomorrow morning at the latest. So with that, the biggest change between January and May, this meeting we normally talk about the changes in the iterations of the budget, is what BCPs or finance letters are included. So back in January, there were two BCPs. One for, I'm shortening up the term here, it's AB 834, the harmful algal bloom program, $1.5 million, that was removed. There was also SB 205 for stormwater discharge compliance, $175,000, that was removed. And two new spring finance letters were added. The cannabis continuation program remains the same between the two budgets. The two that were added were the accurate and timely assessment for the California surface water quality, $1.3 million. We're looking to spread that cost out through all of the fee-paying programs. And then the second one that was added in is the water resilience portfolio, $1.3 million. Those costs will be spread to the WDR and the NPDES specific fee payers. So there's two BCPs that were removed. and there's 2 spring finance letters added in. As John said, it's still under negotiations, waiting for the adopted budget to come into play. David, is there anything you wanted to add specifically to the BCP or the finance letter conversation?
Just kind of talk a little bit about the net difference between the two. Again, there were, and this has to have the impact to the Waste Discharge Permit Fund. Back in the Jan 10th proposed budget, as Glenn mentioned, there were total of 6 PYs and about 1.7 million. And then those were removed, and based on the 2 BCPs currently in play in the May revise, that's 14 positions and about $2.6 million. So the net difference is 8 positions and 914,000. So that's the increase of the net difference from what's in the May revise that's active right now and still going through the negotiation process compared to what was in the January 10th budget. There are a couple of other BCPs, but that don't affect the WDPF, but are more on the reimbursement agreements. So again, a different funding source, so it has no impact to fee payers.
Okay. Thank you, David. And again, when we get to the question and answer session, if any of you out there have any questions related to that, we'll take those questions at that time.
So Glenn, I just wanted to add really quickly, we show the fee payers this table every meeting, and the question might come up, why are we showing this now if we're not proposing any fee increases? I mean, the first thing that you do when you review this is go to the far right column, the adjusted program change, and that typically translates into the order of magnitude of fee increases that we would need. But we've spent a good deal of time over the last 3 or 4 or 5 years, both the stakeholders and our staff, in providing the information, being as transparent as we can with what our programs look like financially. So we wanted to continue that, just so you would have that information, what the pressures are that we're facing, and that again, we are as transparent as we can be, knowing how uncertain, with the uncertain data that we have right now.
All right, thank you, John. So with that, a few other comments I have related to this table. Some of the things that changed, as John indicated, most of the focus is on column I, what each program would need. I call this within the vacuum of a fee increase. A couple of the changes on some of the background information other than the BCP amount. So the BCP net change is about $900,000 increase in total costs, most of that being borne by the NPDES and the WDR fee payers. A few programs, obviously with the COVID-19 and the economic environment right now, we're trying to get a feel for which programs may see a reduction in activity. The easiest one to throw out there is the stormwater program. Usually when the economy goes down, there's fewer construction permits pulled, so there will be some potential reduction. Maybe the stormwater industrial program, some facilities may close and just not reopen. Right now, we're not seeing any of those impacts right now. I did lower our revenue projection for that program a little bit. So that's why, for those of you who are looking at the March presentation versus the June presentation, see stormwater going from roughly 2% to 5%. So it's going up a little bit just because I reduced the revenue side. The agricultural lands program, the ILRP, I also reduced, not because of potential reduction in acreage. I found some data in my data set where we over forecasted some application revenue, so I reduced that. That's a normal process we go through every year, is to tweak some of our assumptions. Other programs that I put some feelers out, the water quality certification, very similar to stormwater, it's a project. There's a turnkey situation, so there may be some fewer certifications in that program. Confined animals, we have heard that milk prices are down, so there is some thought process into that as well for the dairy facilities. Dairies, separately from that, and the confined animal program, is finally seeing the uptick in revenue based off of primarily the Central Valley with their bovine orders and their poultry orders. So it takes a couple of years for new enrollments to fully circulate into our numbers. So you're seeing confined animals seeing a benefit by having additional enrollments for other animal types, but also we know in the dairy, which is the primary revenue generation side, some difficulties for those fee payers. So overall, the numbers haven't changed dramatically other than the BCPs. Some of the revenue numbers we tweak every time we go through this. We update our revenue forecasts and look at that. A couple of other items that we're looking at, the water quality certification. There's a very small workload associated with two different project types, beach monitoring and in-stream gravel. Program staff is looking at potentially moving into a lower fee basis, very similar to the sand mining fee basis. Again, it's a very small, a few dozen projects throughout the state, but looking to associate that more with what the anticipated workload is, similar to what we do with the sand mining. Long term, there is a winery general order going to a workshop to the board in July. We are looking at having a winery fee stakeholder meeting in early August, the same day we do our water quality and water rights fee meeting. It hasn't been published yet. We're working with program to validate that that's the appropriate time to go to the winery folks with a fee structure. I believe if everything goes right, the general order for wineries will go this fall to the board. We will look to take our fee structure at the same time that the program takes that order to the board. So we may have a mid-year insertion of a fee structure for the winery general order. Looking at a few other things here. Okay, so we had a few online questions.
Okay, Bruce Howdeshelt wants to know, is the $1.2 million for accurate and timely assessment of California surface water quality for harmful algal bloom, DPR surface water quality monitoring, or something else?
Question in there? Bruce, you can always call me afterwards.
Is it for, I think the question is it for DPR surface water quality monitoring or something else?
So I'm going to hand this over if Karen Mogus is on the line. If you were listening at this point in time, if you maybe can address the specifics to that BCP. Okay, Sarah's going to unmute the phone here.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, you can hear me? Okay. So, yeah, the accurate and timely assessment is for our Clean Water Act required assessment of all waters based on standards every 2 years. This we were sued on the lack of getting it done every 2 years and lost, and so we had to prepare a compliance plan that was due to the court in January, which informed both the plan for getting the water quality assessment done, and just so you all know, the assessment results in two assessment reports. The 305B report is the general assessment of all waters, and 305B is a section of the Clean Water Act that requires us to do this assessment every 2 years. And then 303D is the section that is identified as part of the assessment, the list of waters that are not meeting standards, and so the list of impaired waters. So the 8 positions are for completing that assessment every 2 years on the cycle that is now includes 3 regions at a time, so that we can be actually on time, which in the last 20 years we've not been on time for that assessment. So it's a general assessment. It's not related to any specific issue. It's data that we solicit from the public. Every 2 years, the assessment is completed in about a 4-year time frame each cycle. And so we'll be conducting concurrent cycles to make sure that we have our each cycle completed. Well, we are submitting a cycle every 2 years to US EPA.
All right, thank you, Karen. And Bruce, if you have any follow-up questions, go ahead and send those in. Do we have any others, Sarah?
Okay, so Debbie Webster from the Central Valley Clean Water Association has 3 separate questions. The first one is, the governor has looked to redirect state personnel to COVID response. How is that paid for?
You want to take that one?
Yeah, so let me start back up a little bit. One of the questions you might have as a stakeholder is, well, if your program's increasing 13, 14%, how does the water board have the capacity to absorb that? And no, we don't have the capacity to absorb that. So we're going to have to do some cost cutting. As the governor said, we're all going to have to tighten our belts a little bit this year. And one of those things that we are doing is the redirection of about 5% of our staff to the Department of Public Health for contact tracing for the COVID efforts. We will be reimbursed for those. We're setting up a separate charge account that those staff can charge to, and then CDPH and the governor's office haven't exactly, and the Department of Finance haven't exactly figured out the mechanics of that, but we will be reimbursed for that staff time. So it won't be the fee payers ultimately paying for that, but that's in the process of being set up.
And I just wanted to add about those positions. Not all of them are fee-funded positions right now. Of course, we have positions, this was a voluntary program where staff volunteered, that then we had to meet the quota of the 5%. With that said, of course, we're in the process of evaluating those positions that were associated with, funds like the Water Rights Fund and the Waste Discharge Permit Fund and the Safe Drinking Water Account, those funds that have fee payers. But keep in mind that some of those positions were under, bond-funded positions and federal money, and so not all of them, of course, are fee-funded supported positions.
Okay, second question from Debbie. The cannabis program in January looked at approximate increase of 120 people. Did I understand correctly that those increases are to be spread over all water quality programs?
Well, David, take that one.
So the BCP, our current program has 120 positions. The continuation BCP is actually reduction. It's down to 116, and not all of those in water quality. Of the 116, 78 are for water quality, and the remaining are for the water rights program. There are 3 funding sources. Listed on here is $10.5 million of WDPF. There's also, I believe it's like $10.9 million of Cannabis Tax Fund, and then approximately about $1.1 million of Water Rights Fund. So and so of those 116, of course, 78 are going, of course, for the water quality, and then of those 78, I believe it's 57 are going to be supported by the WDPF program. And just kind of getting into a little bit more of those details. Of course, we're waiting for the budget and to look at the approval of the cannabis BCP, and we're trying to figure out our revenue sources, especially on the WDPF for cannabis, about fees. We're going to have to evaluate it. We're probably in a position we're going to have to hold, or look at some savings or holding positions to be able to kind of fully fund this program in the next year, without doing any type of fee adjustments.
Yeah, and so based to add to what David was saying, the answer in general is no. It's always been that way. We are not expecting all the other WDPF programs to pay for the cannabis program. In fact, we don't expect any individual WDPF program to pay for others' programs. So we will not be spreading the fee or the cost for that program out to the other fee payers to have them pay for it. If anything, as David said, we're going to have to manage our vacancies, manage our staffing in that program, and perhaps adjust the staffing in that program to fit the funding available.
Yeah, so in line with that, this data only looks at the WDPF impacts. As David and John said, there are other funding sources. The Cannabis Tax Fund is the big one. So in a way, right now we show column F for cannabis, roughly $4 million worth of revenue. That would be, at least in the short term, target staffing to that level, depending on what comes out of the adopted budget. So I was going to hold cannabis to the end, but it looks like we jumped in on that. I don't know, David or John, if you had anything else specific to cannabis. Okay, go ahead, Sarah.
Thanks. So my computer froze, but I think Debbie's last question was, can you talk about the water resilience portfolio and specific, are the positions going to be spread out, or is it going to be spread out between for all WDR or specific WDRs?
Okay, before I turn it over to Karen Mogus, so the way this data is laid out, yeah, a lot of these programs are technically WDR programs, but they're carved out. Land disposal is a carve out. Confined animals is a carve out. Ag lands is a carve out. Cannabis is a carve out. So anyone who doesn't fit one of those carved out categories that's considered a WDR falls into our WDR category on column A. So if you look down the BCP information on the middle of the cost drivers, with the line for the water resilience portfolio, we do state that we intend to have those paid for by the non-carved out WDR and the NPDES fee payers. Both those programs are right around $34 to $35 million programs. So both those programs will take approximately a proportional share that's equal to each other. Karen, if you're still on the line, if you want to have any specific comments to the water resilience portfolio, go ahead.
I didn't hear any program question woven in there. I think you're. Could you repeat the question? I wasn't sure if I.
Okay.
Beyond the fees question, go ahead.
Okay, her question is, please describe the water resilience portfolio. And again, go over specifically, is it spread over all WDR or specific WDR?
So Karen, I answered the second
Glenn
portion.
answered the second part of the question. The first part, just describing the water resilience portfolio, this one has morphed over time. What we landed on was a request for 6 positions for water quality that will do 3 things. One is assist with the regional boards to update the recycled water permits that are outdated and to be in compliance with the recycled water policy. The second piece is to continue to build the program around constituents of emerging concern, including regional monitoring programs statewide, as well as supporting the research that is needed for supporting recycled water for potable reuse in the state. And then the third piece is bringing the pre-treatment program into the water boards to have staff be the lead for 2 reasons. One is that currently most of the pre-treatment program is run through a contract that we have with US EPA, and we lack the institutional knowledge in the water boards for that work. And then we also acknowledge that there's going to need to be an enhanced pre-treatment program that that we will need to implement as we move toward direct potable reuse. So that source control is more of a significant component of the pre-treatment program for those facilities that will be doing direct potable reuse. So those are the 3 components that will be funded by the 6 positions that would be under water quality in the WDPF.
Good morning.
Thank you, Karen. Before we go on to any other emails or questions, we did get some questions from Bob Gore prior to the meeting, so I'm going to jump in and go through some of his questions, and then we'll see if there's any other submitted questions, and then we'll open up the phones for general interaction comments. So Bob, on your very first one, I think we addressed the question related to the accurate and timely assessment of the surface water quality. Those costs are going to be spread to all programs. The next question, let's say you stated why is this being included in the May revise? So basically, why is it new when apparently to your email it was notified back in August? That's nothing I have any knowledge on. All I can do is address what's in the January proposed or the May revise. I don't know, David or John, if you had any specific anything related to that. So Bob, if you have a specific question on that, go ahead and call us separately. Let's see, the next one, I think Karen has already addressed the questions, what staff's going to be doing related to the BCPs, the impaired water bodies, she went over that. Your next note was, what's the justification for existing staff being diverted from other programs? We have new PYs allocated through the BCPs. If staff is moved over from other programs, those positions will be backfilled. So it is additional new staff. And then going into the questions on the cost drivers, let's see, Bob asked, column C, BCP changes. Why is WDR and NPDS tripling? As we said, those are the two programs that are taking over the water resilience portfolio. So it's a new cost specific to those programs that's not being borne by the other fee payers. So it's specific to that finance letter. Next question, Bob, you had was related to column I, the program percent change. WDR, NPDS, and ag lands are all going up significantly. We'd already indicated the primary drivers for WDR and NPDS are because of the spring finance letter. The ag land, I made a reference before. I tweaked down some of the additional acres. We're probably not going to get a lot of new acres in for that program. I had it in my forecast previously, so I took it out. So reducing revenue means the amount needed will go up for that program. Next question, John already answered this one related to cannabis, making sure that we contain the cost for cannabis within the cannabis fee payers, and we're committed to doing that. The next question related to ag lands, irrigated lands. How is the enrolled acre effect proceeding? As indicated before, right now, the acres we had last year are what we're currently forecasting for next year. You'd indicated that Sigma, the SGMA, will fallow crop. Right now, there's no impacts to other programs and what it's going to impact to that program. As we get more information for that and we see enrollments through the coalitions or the individual enrollments decrease, we'll look to adjust our forecasts at that time. But right now, there's no projected change going into the next budget year. Will fee payers see another September surprise? It really comes down to what gets put into the adopted budget. As John said, normally at this time, we're fairly confident of what we're going to see. But with the negotiations going on right now, if there's any major changes between now and the adopted budget, we'll present those at the August meeting. I don't know, John, if you want to, okay with that one. And the next one, Bob, I'm kind of paraphrasing all these. When's the ELAP meeting? So for those of you who are in the program for the Environmental Laboratory Accreditation Program, they had a meeting yesterday on third-party assessors, and we have a fee workshop on Thursday at 10 o'clock to look at our proposed fee structure with the new adopted regs from last month. So I think, David, did I answer all the questions okay there? So Bob, if you have any follow-up questions, go ahead and submit those, or if we go to the open topic, you can jump in, or just contact us separately, and we'll address those in more detail for you. Yeah, so the question was, do we want to do the email questions first before we open up the line? I think so, because it's more controlled right now. It'll be tricky, as John said. We're learning here how to do this. As John said, we may look to do a Zoom-type meeting in August. But when you open up the floor, not knowing how many people are actually on the conference line, we have to make sure we manage that appropriately. Let's go ahead and go through the emails.
Okay, so Chuck White wants to know, can you discuss the ag lands fee a bit more? How will the numbers on the current chart change in each column? I assume the new column I will show no net program change if fees are not to be increased as you suggest.
Part of that will be depending on what's in the budget that gets adopted. Part of that's the negotiation on salaries. If our management or executive officers say we're going to, this is my term here, mitigate some of our expenditures, we will look to hold fees down by reducing some of our costs. Some of that we may or may not be able to present in a clean manner. I think John wants to jump in here on this one.
Oh, I was just going to say, yeah, just because we're not proposing to raise fees won't zero that column out. Basically, that is the actual percent program change that we need to support. And as Glenn said, we're taking a number of measures to reduce our costs. We're reducing the number of contracts we do. We're reducing the number of procurements we do. We're looking at our staffing, our vacancies, making sure that we have the funding to support those before we fill them. The administration is still talking with the bargaining units about salary increases. My understanding is that the increases that staff were to get in July are off the table. They're also talking about a 10% salary reduction, so that'll play into it. And then there's the 5% COVID redirection, which will help us to keep some of our costs down as well.
So this table, Chuck, will show what's in the, well, in August, we'll show what's in the adopted budget and what our forecast projections are. If we're going to make a recommendation to our board not to raise fees, we'll discuss what we're doing to keep our expenditures down for this year. There is a concern that obviously if you hold down costs this year, you're basically just kicking the can down the road. You're deferring it to a future year. But that will come as we look at all these changes, all these adjustments. You know, I took off the column that, you know, we had in the March meeting, the future years, just because there's so much uncertainty right now. It didn't make sense to show a 4 or 5% increase for next year because we have to decide what we're going to do this year first. So again, this chart will be the similar format. It will reflect what's in the adopted budget, and then we'll discuss what we'll do as a water board to hopefully offset some costs in order to keep our goal of not raising fees this year.
Okay, Christina Beckstead from Bandera County Farm Bureau has 3 questions. The first question is, it has been indicated that staff is not recommending a fee increase at this time. Is that subject to change come August?
We don't anticipate that changing, but I do want to warn people that we, staff, are not the decision-making body here, and we say that every year. We make a recommendation to our board. The board has to consider a number of factors that go into it. Your stakeholder opinions, the direction they get from the governor's office, other pressures. So, but that is our recommendation, and we don't anticipate that changing at all.
Second question, there has been mention outside of this meeting that the State Water Board is wanting to add 26 new employees to the staff and that fees will be charged to the WDR holders. Can you speak to this?
Yeah, unfortunately, there was a news article that came out in, I think, AgNet West News. It was fairly inaccurate in terms of the numbers that were in there. So it really isn't 26. 10 positions in one of the BCPs, the Caltrans one, are fully cost reimbursable. We do some work on permitting work on Caltrans projects, and they reimburse us fully for those costs. So that has nothing to do with fees. So those are off the table. In the water resiliency BCP, there were a couple positions, again, that were cost recovery positions, meaning the Water Commission was going to pay us to look at water rights work related to the reservoirs that are being planned, sites and others. So again, those are off the table. So it really was 14 positions that would be funded through the WDPF. It's the accurate and timely assessment of California's surface water, and then some of the water resiliency portfolio.
David, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think between the BCPs that were removed from January, the spring finance letters that were added, we probably had a net increase of the request of PYs of what, 4 or 5 staff? Is that what it was?
It was an increase of 8.
8, okay.
8. And to mention, John had mentioned the 14 that were WDPF. Of those, 8 were part of the accurate and timely assessment of California surface water quality, which that portion, that 1.3, we were proposing to spread that to all fee payers, which then, the ag and the like dairy programs would take a portion of, and the calculation of that was like less than 1%. But the water resilience portfolio, that was going to, of course, as Glenn mentioned earlier, was going to be spread to WDR and NPDS. So programs like ag and dairy weren't going to be, at this point, we're going to be part of those costs.
Okay, and last question. On the winery order, August is a terrible time to expect comments from the actual winery owners as harvest will likely be in full swing. How does this division expect to have true stakeholder engagement if most will be unable to participate?
Yeah, so we're aware of that. The winery industry in general for the last couple of years has asked us to stay away from the crush season. So we're working with program on that. They'll help us determine when that stakeholder outreach will roll out. So right now it is scheduled for August, but we understand that August through the end of October is a really tough time for the wine industry. So it may be delayed. We don't know. We're gonna take our cues from program essentially on that.
Yeah, I want to add in a couple of things here. We picked that date for two reasons. One is because there's a board workshop. I think it's July 21st, if I got my dates right. And so we wanted to go fairly quickly after that. And we also, because of staff working remotely, room availability, we already had this room reserved on August 5th. So it's something we're talking with program staff. If they come back to and say it doesn't work because of the fee-paying community, we'll look to adjust. What's going to be hard is if they go to the board, say, I think it's November, Sarah? End of October or November. We want to make sure that we have discussions with our fee schedule prior to it going to the board for adoption, and it's right during the crush season, so we're kind of hand-tied right now, but we'll work. We may have a couple of meetings. We can obviously do a webcast or a Zoom-type meeting with program, so those that are remote can come in. Maybe, I'm not sure the timing is, an evening might work better versus during the day, that type of thing, but we'll work with program to find the best solution for those meetings.
Yeah, we'll definitely work with stakeholders. We may start the discussions a little bit early as well. It's a little bit difficult for us since the fees are based on the structure that'll end up in the permit, and we can't get too far ahead of the permit because that would be wasted effort. But so we definitely will work with the stakeholders and with program to come up with a good schedule.
Thank you, and you can always follow up with us later.
Okay, Bruce Howdeschelt has some more questions. What is the status of irrigated lands program development in regions of the state that don't currently have WDRs? According to the 2017 Siskiyou County Ag Commissioner's report, there are 210,000 cropland acres, of which 138,000 are irrigated acres that currently don't pay any state water quality fees.
Bruce will follow up with you separately. I don't have any specific information from the regional boards that do not currently have any orders in place. We can reach out with Brianna. I'm not sure if Brianna's on the phone. Brianna St. Pierre, sorry, I should use the full name. With program staff to get an update and present that when we have more information.
Okay, his second question is, what does the winery general order cover that irrigated lands program or the state's industrial general order does not?
I am not able to answer that one.
I can answer it if you can hear me. This is Karen Mogus.
Yeah, go ahead, Karen.
The winery order is intended to cover the discharge of waste, winery waste to land. So it is similar to other food processor waste discharge requirements. So it is not intended to replace the irrigated lands program, although there is some streamlining that we're able to do with the statewide order to help some wineries that do use their waste for irrigating crops. In terms of the industrial general permit, we were which is for stormwater discharge from industrial facilities. We did attempt to streamline that permit with the winery order, but because the discharge from wineries is typically to land, and the industrial general permit is a NPDES permit, so that it is for regulating discharges to surface waters. Those are very vastly different sets of requirements, and the NPDES is much more onerous and more difficult to combine with our state authority WDRs for the winery waste in combination with the stormwater waste. discharge. So that's just a general overview. The nutshell, the Reader's Digest version is basically that the statewide winery order is intended to address winery waste discharge to land.
Thank you, Karen. So it would most likely fall under the WDR program as far as the enrollments. So it'll be within the WDR program.
Okay, and this is the last email question for now. Rick Haywood from Southern California Edison wants to know, are annual fee increases, specifically in the Water Quality CERT program, annual fee for utilities to address SB 901 wildfire anticipated?
So since we're currently going to project, or at least recommend our board not to raise fees, there would be no impact related to the fee payers for the SB 901. If we were to drill down and say we need to have a fee increase for water quality CERT, where it says 11% right now, we haven't worked with program to see if we need to adjust the SB 901. It's the first year, it's just the first year of enrollment was last year into that program. Most likely, it takes a couple of years to kind of see, is the structure, is the revenue covering staff? I do believe that program is still fully, or is trying to still staff up. There was some uniqueness of trying to hire staff this spring with all the COVID issues. So that question there, it could, depending on how program feels within their program, those fee increases should be spread across. Right now, probably not, but it could go up in the future depending on what the analysis shows. Okay. So I think we've got done with our email questions. We're going to have Sarah unmute the phone for any questions or comments that anyone wants to have. This will be the tricky part. If we have a lot of people jumping in, we'll try to get through everyone that we can. So we'll open up the floor to anyone who has any comments. I guess we won't have any issues with people talking over each other. David, is there anything else you wanted to add that we haven't gone over?
No.
Make sure of that. I'm not used to being in the middle. I'm used to being on the end. I have to go back and forth. I don't know why you guys picked the end seats. Put me in the middle. John, do you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I just wanted to say that, this has been a difficult year for everybody I know, and we've implemented a number of things to, if you are having trouble paying your fees, we're willing to work with you for payment schedules. We've delayed our late notices going out, some little administrative things to help people pay their fees. And then the other thing, we are looking at the economic forecast in terms of our revenue. We don't know exactly if it's going to go down. For the state as a whole, we won't know what the financial condition of the state is until after July, probably, due to the income tax being deadline being deferred. But that should not affect us very much. But what will affect us is if revenues go down in any of our programs. So we're still up in the air in a lot of respects, and we're just going to have to play it by ear and see how things develop. But and I haven't said this yet, but please, if you do have any questions or concerns, email Glenn or David or myself, or call us up, and we'd be happy to talk through whatever.
Before we get to some other questions that may come up, I don't know if we mentioned, it's probably part of the next steps, which is the end, but our next fee stakeholder meeting for water quality is on August 6th. This is a reminder. Go ahead, Sarah.
Okay, so there's one question from Justin Gamble from the City of Oceanside. Will there be an opportunity for Phase 1 MS4 permittees to comment on the proposed budget before going to the State Water Board, and when is the deadline?
So the general process is 10 days prior to when we go to the board. We usually go to the board, the second board meeting in September. 10 days prior to that, our documents will be publicly noticed, and there will be a comment period for that at that time. Did I get that correct, Sarah?
Yeah, so that goes into the next question from someone online, but I think it's a general question for everyone, which is when or can we provide the proposed fee schedule?
The proposed fee schedule, obviously, when we go to our board, once we, my term, crunch the numbers, once the adopted budget, once we get direction from management and exec on what we're going to propose to our board. Obviously, if we're not going to propose any fee changes, we're going to have some minor tweaks here or there, some language, cleanup, stuff like that. Maybe, as I mentioned before, water quality certification may recommend that a couple of projects go to a lower fee basis. It would come out 10 days prior to the board meeting.
Yeah, so just to add on to what Glenn said, we typically don't release our actual fee schedule until the September board meeting agenda goes out, and we typically go to the second board meeting in September. Prior to that, what we discuss at the August meeting will be similar to this, which is showing the percent changes and what each program needs, but it's not an actual proposed fee schedule.
So in the past, if there's a program where we're looking at doing, I call it methodology or a change in the fee structure, we'll work on some breakout meetings to discuss those on various options or alternatives to discuss those. On a year where we're just increasing the percentage amounts, if we're looking, I'm just going to say this theoretically, stormwater program is made up of construction, industrial, and municipal. A few years ago, we changed the relationship of how much staff was working on each one of those. So it wasn't a linear, say 10% increase to all those categories. We did adjust some higher or lower. If we do something like that, we'll reach out to those communities specifically in advance to let them know. But if we're just doing we're going to increase all parameters of a fee 10%, we won't show the fee schedule until we submit the documents to the board. Questions? One more turn to David.
No?
Got any other? Yes, we got another one. Okay, anybody else on the phone have any comments they want to make? Anyone on the phone want to make any comments before we finish up our meeting here? I think we've answered all email questions. I think I hear someone in the background, but I can't make out what's happening unless it was just background noise.
Is anyone there?
Okay. And as John said, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to myself, to David, or to John, or any of our staff. We can address those specifically. Again, once we get the adopted budget here, hopefully in the next week or two, we'll look to review all the information that's been provided, prepare our updated documents for the August 6th meeting, which will be, again, a dual meeting of water quality and then later on water rights that day. Yeah, and then the change reflecting the program adjustments at the bottom of the attachment will be posted on our website this afternoon. So if you need a copy of that, reach out to us individually or just wait till it's posted and you can take a copy of it for yourself. So with that, I appreciate everyone's time and take care, stay safe, and we'll touch soon.
Thank you.